Good morning. I'm Steve Runyon. I'm your Sunday associate today. We only have two announcements this morning. The first is for anybody, newcomers, new members, or anybody who's interested in refreshing their knowledge of what it means to be UU, the Getting to Know UU sessions start Saturday, May 7th. And if you would be interested in attending, you can write welcome@muuf.org. The annual budget drive is off to a great start, and we encourage all of you to fill out your pledge cards that you either picked up or received in the mail and get those in. Please be as generous as you can, within your means, of course, and anything you can do will make a difference. Thank you.
Good morning again, and I'd like to invite you to greet your neighbor, if you would. You keep social distance properly, but maybe say namaste. So as Steve lights the chalice, may we all read together the words for chalice lighting. Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Let's sing together hymn 360, if you have a book. Here we have gathered. It's on the screen.
Side by side, circle of kinship, come and step inside. May all who seek here find a holy word. May all who speak here feel they have been heard. Sing now together this our heart's own song. Here we have gathered, called to celebrate days in our lifetime, matter small and great. We of all ages, women, children, men, infants and sages, sharing what we can. Sing now together this our heart's own song. Life has its battles, sorrows and regret, but in the shadows let us not forget. We who now gather know each other's pain. Kindness can heal us as we give, we gain. Sing now to friendship this our heart's own song.
Good are you guys this morning? Good. So the Velveteen Rabbit. How many of you have heard the Velveteen Rabbit out there in the audience? Yes, very good. Nice. I'm not going to read the Velveteen Rabbit to you this morning, but I do want to take out this one quote. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real. And in a child's mind, you should have seen them this morning. Yes, that's true. Those children thought it was true. And then the next slide, I wanted to present this to them. Over the course of the last couple of years, they've been spending lots of time playing with this toy. And my question is, do they become real? And again, their little minds said, their heads said yes. That the children of our age think that the things that they view online are real. So then I said, well, let's take a look at something that maybe your parents may have also played with at some point, and that would be the Star Wars people and the Legos people, right? We play so much with things that are online that we begin to believe that they are real, and they take the form of a real relationship and a real person. And so we lose track of what is real and what is not real in our lives. So I went a little search for the next slide. And this platypus, is it a real platypus? How many of you in the audience think this is a real platypus? Many of you might say it's real. And when I first look at it, this is a real one. I used this as my real example. And then I searched a little further and realized this was not a real platypus. Notice its human features on its face, right? So then I searched a little bit more, and I said to the children, this must be a real platypus. And some of them agreed with me. And then others said, no, but look at their feet. Look at its feet and its beak. It's a toy. Right, this is not a real platypus. So then I searched a little bit more, and I came up with some animals that look a lot like platypuses. And I was told later that it wasn't a platypus. But at any rate, it's a platypus. And anyway, I said, well, how do we know that these are real animals? How do we know? And we got to looking at the clues. And one child said, well, this one has hair, and look at its beak. It looks moist, and so that must be real. But what gets me about the picture is right here, the clue. Can somebody read it from where you are? It's a zoo. It's a zoo in Australia, the Tarragona Zoo in Australia. So that made me say, wow, this must be the real platypus. So what are the clues? It's the dirt, it's the zoo, it's the human hands, it's the animal itself. This is a true platypus. So then we went on to talk about the next slide. Oh, is this real? And the children were like, yes, that's COVID. I said, did you ever see one of them? Oh, no. Well, how do you know it's real? Can you see it? No, but we know it's real. And we know that people can see it under a microscope, right? So we know it's real. We know its effect on us the last 2 years. We don't see it, but we know it's real. How do we know what's real and what's not real in our lives? And then the next slide, I asked them, what do we know that's true about our schools? And we know it in our schools. The last 2 years, we know it in our schools that the virus has taken over, and we have a lot of things in our classrooms that were not the same 2 years ago. Children with masks, and luckily some of them are coming off. Social distancing. Notice that they are sitting on little mats from each other. This has been real. This has been real. And so as we bring our children back into the classroom, back into reality, we have to realize that their little minds cannot decide what is real and what is not real. And we have to be patient with them, and we have to help them. So the next slide is actually a video that cannot be seen. We got it then. So this is just a fun little slide for you a video to watch now.
I have evidence that proves my dad's a space alien. He speaks a weird language. He drinks green stuff. He says he's from Albuquerque. I'm not buying it. I mean, just look at him. And one more thing, he has a spaceship. The evidence doesn't lie. My dad's an alien.
The highly advanced Audi A6.
So it's a
named Dakota
commercial,
Driver's 10
but it's
best.
such a great commercial to talk with children about, well, what is evidence? How do we know it's real? How do we decide on what is true and what's not true? So as you move forward into Alan's talk today, keep your mind open for what is real and what is not.
Well, this place in the order of service features something that's quite real, the offering. It's a time really for us to give to the fellowship from the resource of our finances that helps the physical work of the fellowship to occur. The support of the building, the services, the staff, all the things that we do together. We share in so many ways. We share in our spiritual depth and conversations. We share in our service. We share in our artistry. And we also share with the energy of our finances. Today's offering will be a split, 50% between the Morristown UU Fellowship here and the UU Ministry for the Earth, a time for sharing our energy of our money. A time in our order of service where we recognize milestones that have occurred in our lives and of those of people that we care about. I've not received a card with any names this morning, but I know that there are such names that you may have in your own mind and hold in your heart, and maybe yourselves in your own way have done something that's remarkable for you or passed a kind of interior milestone recently. There is a particular milestone that I do want to mention, which is that of the passing of member of our congregation, Peg Bird. Peg was a member for many years. I knew her myself when I first, it was a long time ago, joined this fellowship. She was an artist, a ceramic artist, and quite a creative person. And her husband, Steve, was also a member, but passed a few years earlier. Our hearts go out this morning to her children, Orrin and Susan, and Steve has lit a candle for Peg. And she has 4 grandchildren as well. She actually also, I remember correctly, started a haiku society in New Jersey. So we hold this morning Peg Bird in our hearts. Let's join together in quiet, in reflection, in meditation, in prayer. Let us take a moment of opening, a time to open to the quiet, the space between everything, between busyness and busyness, between doing and not doing, between even being and not being. This pregnant fullness, quiet, in which is what is most precious for us, may be seen, though oftentimes obscured by so much that covers it. Our caring, our fears, our joys, our longings, our aspirations, just opening to that which lies a little deeper than we might always, most of the time, be familiar with. And let us in this space this morning hold the life of Peg Bird and her children and her grandchildren. And may we receive in the quiet the hurt and the pain, the suffering all over the world, in Ukraine, but also in countries around the world whose own suffering has been rather obscured by a more directed attention mostly on Ukraine. May we open our hearts, most of all, to the capacity that we have to open, to be present, and to care for ourselves and for everyone else, and for the earth itself. A moment or two of silence together. So be it. Amen. Blessed be. I thought there was a moment of something coming into my openness I wasn't always sure about. I want to share with you a story. It's a true story by a writer named Sarah Miller. She begins by saying these words: the sea level, she says, in Miami has risen 10 inches since 1900, and in the 2,000 years prior did not really change at all. The consensus among informed observers is that the sea level will rise in Miami Beach somewhere between 2 to 3 feet by 2050, and by 2100 maybe up to 5 or 6 feet, which means Unless you own a yacht and a helicopter, sayonara. Sunset Harbor is expected to fare slightly worse and to do so more quickly. So I felt that Sunset Harbor would be a very good place to start pretending to buy a home. Amazingly, in the face of these incontrovertible facts about the climate, the business of luxury real estate is chugging along here just fine. And I wanted to see the cognitive dissonance up close. Lying is not my favorite thing, but when it's called for, the only thing to do is to jump in with both feet. So I rendezvoused with a few real estate agents and found myself talking to a former agent once more. He was gesturing at the unusual rainy day for this time of year, late March. Usually, he said, at night, you'll be looking at the best spectacle of a sunset here. He was framed by Biscayne Bay, and it made me think of expensive butter sitting on a blue ceramic dish. I oohed and ahed over the view quite genuinely, because if you don't think about the fact that it's filled with thousands of pounds of post-hot Pilates survey poops, Biscayne Bay is breathtaking. I asked how the flooding was. There are pump stations everywhere, and the roads were raised, he said. So that's all been fixed. I asked how the hurricanes were. He said that because the hurricanes came from the tropics, from the south, and this was the west side of Miami Beach, they were not that bad in this neighborhood. Oh, right, I said, as if that made any sense. I asked him if he liked it here. I love it, he said. It's one of the most thriving cities in the country. It's growing rapidly. He pointed to a row of tall buildings in a neighborhood called Edgewater, kind of an interesting name, that were just 3 years old. That skyline was built in the last 3 years. Wow, I said. In the last 3 years, they're not worried about sea level rise? He said, it's definitely something the city is trying to combat. They're fighting it by raising everything. So far, it hasn't been an issue. I couldn't wait to steal this line, slightly altered. I'm afraid of dying, but so far, it hasn't been an issue. Let's sing together, When I Am Frightened.
When I am frightened, will you reassure me? When I'm uncertain, will you hold my hand? Will you be strong for me, sing for me quietly? Will you share some of your stories with me? If you will show me compassion, then I may learn to care as you do. Then I may learn to care. When I am angry, will you still embrace me? When I am thoughtless, will you understand? Will you believe in me, stand by me willingly? Will you share some of your questions with me? If you will show me acceptance, then I may learn to give as you do. Then I may learn to give. When I am troubled, will you listen to me? When I am lonely, will you be my friend? Will you be there for me, comfort me tenderly? Will you share
This week we have celebrated Earth Day, in fact, the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. So it seems an apt time to attend to the reality of what is real with the Earth at this place in time. And more significantly, to attend to the state of our consciousness, our mind, and our thinking that has left us in the state in which we find ourselves today. Many of us are finding ourselves in a great deal of pain as we confront the increasing devastation of climate change. Global warming was once considered only as a remote possibility, but it has become very real to any of us who have lost homes in a fire or a flood. And whether or not we have personally suffered, many of us are pained for the earth itself and its creatures. It was 40 years ago, at least, that experts began warning that we had a limited window of opportunity for preventing climate change. A notable figure was Al Gore. In 2006, prophesied in his film and book, An Inconvenient Truth. He said that we had only a few years left then in which to act. But what has happened is that each year since we've expanded that window of opportunity because it was just too difficult, too hard, too much to face the reality of where we were. To look at our lifestyle, and more significantly, to acknowledge the inadequate thinking and consciousness from which we were living. Alas, our window of opportunity has now closed. We have crossed tipping points which are creating their own feedback loops, and we cannot control them. In consequence, many of us are experiencing a new kind of anxiety, which psychologists have called climate anxiety. It's very high for millennials because they face a lifetime which will be, for sure, more frightening than that of any previous generation. No wonder that young people like Greta Thunberg have sounded an alarm. For the first time in Western history, we all face a future which will be more downhill than uphill. It's easy to feel a little bit like Woody Allen. He made this comment at one point, I think, in a film. He says, more than any other time in history, humankind faces a crossroads. One path leads to despair and utter hopelessness. The other, towards total extinction. Let's pray that we have the wisdom to choose correctly. It's kind of like that some of us feel today. But though our anxiety is rather unique in history, it is not unique in degree, in kind, from the kind of generalized anxiety we all feel every moment of our lives if we seriously confront the inconvenient truth that everything changes and is impermanent. The fact of nothing lasting makes us anxious because it means we cannot absolutely control absolutely anything. So we find it difficult, very difficult, to accept it's built into our human nature, the reality of limits, which is why I think the Buddha so compassionately reminded us not to deny impermanence. Anicca is the word in the ancient language of Pali. For impermanence is the essential reality of our existence. A doctor told me about a teacher he had in medical school who was talking about the probability of various diseases and disabilities in his class. And one student asked him if he could please list the most prominent causes of death. He paused for just a moment, and then he pronounced, well, what we know for certain is that the leading cause of death is birth. Whatever it may be in the next world, this reality is true of ours. We may not accept this truth philosophically, we may accept this truth philosophically, but it's not easy to consider it in a personal way. I was at a recent meeting of the Memorial Society of Morris, it was in called, now it's the Funeral Alliance of Morris County, and an attendee there stood up to question the speaker on one occasion. He said, if anything should happen, where should I have my advance directive posted? And the speaker paused just a moment and said, I just want to be sure. Did I correctly hear you say if? The question in the way of this funeral society member, it's not surprising and it's not unnatural because we live within a consciousness that just does not accept the fact of limits as real. Instead, the consciousness from which we so often act deludes us into believing that we will be ever able forever to modify the world to accommodate our desires, and that there will always be somewhere a new frontier. This consciousness of hubris permeates our mythology, our theology, our philosophy, and our psychology. In Judaism, it forms the premise for a promised land, eventually of harmony. In Christianity, it buttresses a belief in a future heaven and the return of a future Christ who will make everything perfect. Enlightenment philosophy, which is largely the philosophy that's given birth to our UU faith, promises the possibility of a future utopia on earth where everything will eventually become just and reasonable. It's almost humorous, if it were not so serious, to realize that it is the very success of this consciousness, a way of thinking that does not admit limits and has deluded us into therefore believing in dominion and control, that it is the success of this consciousness that has precipitated an ultimately uncontrollable crisis that we now face. You could even go so far as to say that our desire to control our climate, if you can use the word climate in a general way, which to refer to everything that surrounds us, our land, our personal relationships, even what's inside us, the food we eat, and especially our random thoughts. If you could speak of climate in that way, you could go so far as to say that our very desire to control this climate is actually the incipient cause of our big climate crisis. We humans are kind of the butt of a very bad practical joke. The consciousness that we accepted and which deluded us into believing that we could order the world according to our liking by disavowing the reality of change and disregarding the finality of limits has forced us to face the ultimate limit. Until recent years, this consciousness of unrestricted possibility created effects that were very gradual, and we did not have to really confront the veracity of this way of thinking. But now we are experiencing its karma. Karma is not some mysterious doctrine. It just simply refers to the fact that what we do has results. Our actions have consequences. Our habits of thinking lead to habits of behavior, and our habits of behavior add up. As we say in our current parlance, our intentions have impact. Our consciousness and the next level of behavioral habits, whether they are personal or cultural or religious, have had now a culmination in climatic impact. We have breached the carrying capacity of our atmosphere for CO2 and methane, and set in motion secondarily already irreversible feedback loops. But this karma we initiated many years ago. For a long time, we've pumped oil without respecting the needs and the limits of Earth. We've overdrawn, some would say stolen, from the Earth's bank account of fossil fuel. We did not pay the cost of this overdraft, and we have never proffered reparations. Since the early reports and warnings of climate change, the disparity between what we want and what we can have is only accelerated. Until now, the very use of energy of Bitcoin surpasses the total energy use of Sweden. We've just been unable to accept limits, the boundaries of our cravings, the need for, we call it, for everything. We've given ourselves a license to demand whatever products we wished from an ever-inventive technology that would profit by supplying them. So we were really involved in a very pernicious feedback loop ourselves, which demand increased supply and profit depended upon increasing demand. It was the acceptance of this cycle, in fact, that after the Depression of the 30s caused officials in the Treasury Department of the US government to find a means of getting us out of the Great Depression by initiating planned obsolescence. Albert Einstein famously declared that we cannot solve a problem with the same consciousness out of which we created it. I believe what Einstein said is true. The very bad news is that from within the purview of our habituated consciousness, we can't even really comprehend what a more advanced consciousness would look like. We're so enmeshed in what we have. But the good news is that we don't have to discern a finished vision. All we have to do is simply question the reality of our former consciousness and realize it is not based upon reality. Then, hopefully, bit by bit, we can begin to release our attachment to this view. And as we begin to question our consciousness, our typical unconscious consciousness that has brought us to this point, and mentally liberate ourselves from its influence, we will discover something. We will discover a new, wider, deeper, truer consciousness that formerly existed only in the background of our minds, but was covered by the foreground. But this background will now reverse the gestalt and become the foreground of our living. This consciousness is inclusive, it's beautiful, and it will meet every need we have and satisfy all the desires of the world. But we may have to begin awakening to a new consciousness with an act of mourning. We may have to grieve without shame for the plight of our earth today. After all, we might remember that our tears are actually created from the very same salt water of the ocean that birthed us. And it may be time now for us to return some of this water back to the sea. We will need to ask our children to forgive us for exploiting the earth as we have, and for acting unjustly to our fellow human beings, and for extinguishing the vast proportion of Earth's creatures. It's not that we were evil. It's not that we were bad. It's just that we were unevolved, and we were very ignorant of the reality we proposed. We lost ourselves in a fictional consciousness that deluded us into believing that more and more would be helpful, that greed would bring about well-being. It didn't work. We can more conscientiously now begin to monitor our own personal cravings and aversions, and begin to moderate our desire to control and to consume. We can increase our ability to accept, this doesn't mean agree with, the reality of the boundaries that we oftentimes face in all different areas of our life, and to find it more able to accept our limits, particularly when we don't like them. That's the danger place. We can affirm for our children and our grandchildren the preciousness that they are born at this extraordinary time. Theirs is the opportunity to reverse the karma of a grasping consciousness of generations and to emerge into a new consciousness of inclusion and compassion. We may model for them by our own living the truth that the purpose of life is not to succeed. We can never do this fully, possibly, nor to win as we believed was so necessary. It wasn't even to mold the world to our needs as we foolish or thought was possible. But the purpose of life is to realize compassion and to attend to the needs of those who have them, especially ourselves and creatures and the earth. It's just like we're all at the hospice caring for the earth. And just as a few of us, none of us, maybe in practice, would desert our baby, our parents, or our lifelong companion if they were sick or in hospice. And similarly, we can lovingly abide by the bedside of earth and all its creatures today and provide palliative care as the earth becomes increasingly stressed. We can love the earth deeply at this moment of transition in its history. The world beseeches our love, and love is the one thing that is not limited. In fact, love increases as we spend it. As we free ourselves from a consciousness of grasping and trying to overcome everything that's in our way, we will continue all the projects that we are so involved in. Our work for social justice, for example, our work for income equity, for gender identity, for anti-partisanship, for charity and for peace. But we may begin to aspire from a different place, rooted in more depth, a place of depth that is accepting of the fact of impermanence and inspired by the arising of compassion. As environmentalists, I think we may want to reflect upon the degree in which we sometimes become susceptible to slipping into this old consciousness of grasping and control as we attempt to technologically modify, control, and organize the consequences of climate change today through our unquestioned ambition and a heroic expertise which we so strongly believe in. Instead, I think the pattern for us that's valuable as environmentalists might be like that of a good community organizer. You know, a good community organizer goes into the community that has various needs without a directive saying you should do this and you should do that, but simply sits down with the folks and asks them what their problems are, what they need, what is their suffering, and helps them to unite and then leads them into redress. Similarly, I think we need, as environmentalists, to sit down and more fully listen to the needs of nature and not what our needs are of nature, and release our sense of elitism and human dominion. Maybe we can dream of a world, I think we can, where we will act for the good of humanity without the need of always achieving even a reward, because we're acting from a deeper place. And care for nature without the assurance of success. It's not important. What is important is that we care deeply and that we act. Maybe we can live from a place where we can leave behind more than we take and generously pay for everything that we enjoy. And maybe, just maybe, we may be able to laugh now and then at our foolishness. That is, we may find the freedom to laugh at our own expense. For in this, we have in truth an unused expense account. Having seen our folly, maybe, I hope and pray, we will be able to free ourselves from our attachments and awaken into a new way of compassionate and caring living with each other, with the earth, with all of its creatures, and with every human being, because every human being, including us, has the capacity for a larger consciousness. May it be so. I invite us to sing together. Oh, I would like very much to do a reading. Thank you, Evan. Yes, if you would. And if you are on your left, then we'll do the sentences on the left. And those of you on your right, the lower screen sentences on the right. So starting on, say, your left side. Connections are made slowly. Sometimes they grow underground. You cannot always tell what is happening.
More than half a tree is spread out in the soil under your feet.
Penetrate quietly as the earthworm that blows no trumpet.
Fight persistently as the creeper that brings down the tree.
Spread like the squash plant that overruns the garden.
Gnaw in the dark and use the sun to make sugar.
Weave real connections, create real nodes, build real houses.
Live a life you can endure. Make love that is loving.
Keep tangling and interviewing and taking more in. A thicket and bramble wildness to the outside, but to us interconnected with rabbit runs and burrows and lairs.
Live as if you like yourself, and it may happen.
Reach out and keep reaching out, keep bringing in.
This is how we are going to live for a long time, not always.
For every gardener knows that after the digging, after the planting, after the long season of tending and growth, the harvest comes. So let us sing together now for the beauty of the earth.
For
leave this place, may we say the words that are written in our service and they're on our screen, connected with extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth